After visiting the California Grill last time we were at Disney, I wanted to bring some of the magic back home with us because, at least for a while, we're not going to be able to have any magic there. Megan's favorite dinner there is the pork tenderloin. I wanted to get as close as I could, even though I know that I didn't have some of the ingredients. But if we look at their menu, we see that they have a goat cheese polenta, which was a really big hit, mushrooms, kalettes, bacon, dried cherries, and a Zinfandel glaze. But I know we could make it pretty close to that. Let's go ahead and make this. First, what we need to do is select our pork for this. And I was a little disappointed at the butcher that they only had these little pork chops that were only about a ½ inch thick. If I had it my way, I would have had ones that were closer to 3/4 inch or so thick. You want them thick, boys. Once you get over being sad about the thin pork chops, you need to make the rub for this. And for that, we need 2 teaspoons of paprika, 4 teaspoons of brown sugar, 4 teaspoons of white sugar, 1½ teaspoons of kosher salt, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, onion powder, and ginger powder, and then just a little bit of rosemary powder, just a pinch, and a ½ teaspoon of cayenne, just depending on how spicy you like it. Then give all that flavor a good mixin', and we're ready to give our pork a good rub down. And a good gauge for this is sprinkle some of the rub over all of the pork until it begins to look like if you put a wet hand into some sand at the beach, that sort of grainy look that's at the top. That's what we want to see on this. Whenever you're cooking pork chops, especially if they were some of the thicker ones, but even here, you have a tendency to get a little bowl because the sinew and the fat rolls up and you get a little bowl and it's impossible to cook evenly. So I'm just cutting every ½ inch or so down the fat just to make sure that it doesn't cup up and we can cook this completely evenly. A cup of pork though, that kind of sounds pretty good. Maybe we'll make something like that. But let's get back to this. For one of our sides, we're making a red pepper and red onion sweet and sour slaw. It's going to go under our pork chop and really round out some of the sweetness from the rub that we put on our pork chop. So first thing that I'm doing is cutting up 1 red pepper and adding to that 1/2 of a red onion. I had the peppers be a little bit thicker than the onion slices because I wanted the peppers to have a little bit of bite whenever you bit into them. But we'll reduce it down enough that they're still soft, but the onions are going to be really nice and caramelized. Oh, almost forgot to give this baby some color. Want to chiffonade some basil. So what you do to do that is stack all your basil leaves up and twist them sort of into a basil tube, and then take long knife cuts to get long strips of basil. We'll put that into our sweet and sour peppers and onions for some color and a nice flavor addition. Okay, to make these up, once we have everything chopped up, heat up a pan with about a tablespoon of olive oil over medium-high heat and add in the chopped peppers and onions from before. After a couple minutes, and you hear them sizzle a little bit, add in about a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half of white granulated sugar. Allow the mixture to continue to cook over medium-high heat until the onions start to turn a deeper color. Then turn your heat down to low heat and drizzle in about a tablespoon and a half of balsamic vinegar. Let it rest on low heat until it's time to serve. Then mix in your basil that we cut up. Now to get our pork ready. They've been sitting out for about 15 minutes with the rub on them. Get a pan with about a tablespoon and a half of olive oil in it. Once the pan and the olive oil get warmed up, add in your pork chop laying away from you so if any splashes come up, they don't jump up and burn your skin. After keeping that cooking on medium heat, depending on the thickness of your pork chop, it would take a couple minutes, and then we're going to flip. Make sure that your heat is a medium heat. Flip a little bit sooner than I did, so maybe a minute or 2 on each side. Also, after you flip, baste the side that you just flipped with a little bit of compound butter, which I made with butter, garlic, and parsley. And so I just let that melt down and take a spoonful. What basting does is it not only does it keep the meat moist, but it also delivers a lot of flavor onto the crust. Tyler, what about this goat cheese polenta you were talking about? Well, okay, calm down. Bring a medium saucepan up over medium-high heat. Add in 1/2 cup of chicken broth, 1/4 cup of heavy cream, and 1/4 cup of water. Bring that up to a simmer and then slowly whisk in 1/4 cup of cornmeal. You want to do this really slow because if you do it too quick, the cornmeal could lump up and not be as appetizing. So then stir in 1 small clove of garlic, 1/2 teaspoon of chopped thyme, a little less than 1/4 cup of goat cheese, and about 1 tablespoon of butter, and stir that all in until the goat cheese and butter melt and things become nice and gooey. Finally, add in about 2 tablespoons of the chopped sun-dried tomatoes, and what I wish I had here was some chopped bacon. I thought bacon would have went really well in here, would have amped up the porky flavor to complement the pork chop, and learn from my mistake and try to get some of that bacon in there if you can. But you know what? Enough talk about bacon. We got a really nice meal here. Let's plate it up. To do that, I started with goat cheese polenta down on the plate. Then I came on top of that with some of the sweet and sour pepper and onion slaw. And finally, one of the pork chops that I did really well. I was really happy with the color, the way that turned out. And I tried to make it a little fancy with some of the renderings from the pork chop, but I think it would have turned out better if I had a squeeze bottle that would have been a little bit more controlled. And so that was promptly purchased from Amazon. So then all I need to do now is turn the plate around 100 times and try to get a good picture for the gram. And finally invite Megan over to see how well I did at bringing the magic home and recreating one of her favorite meals at Disney and her favorite one at the California Grill. For me, the polenta was creamy, the peppers were exactly what we needed to complement the pork chop, and the pork chop, it was super well seasoned. I love that rub. I encourage you to make that and put it on the pork, whether you're doing it on the stove like I did or out on the grill. It's going to make a wonderful rub to add. So let's see what Megan thinks.
You
like that?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That's really good.
I'm using that sound.
Oh no.